Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Lewis Cullman has written a most interesting book that tells how he made a lot of money and how he likes to give it away. But you've also told us about a wonderful lifetime, which is not over. Many years more to come, I hope.
Yes, I hope so.
Tell us about your life. You grew up in New York. You came into a family that was pretty well off to begin with.
Yeah.
You really had a lovely, privileged upbringing, although it had its own little strains in it, right?
That's right.
So where did you grow up?
Grew up in New York City, but my father decided to send us all the way to school at a very early age. I went away to Fessenden School. I think I was maybe 10 years old, 11 years old, I don't know. It's a pre-prep school up in West Newton, Mass.
Uh-huh.
And we all went there, we all went to Hotchkiss, and we all went to Yale. I used to say to my father, I think you got a quantity discount for these schools.
How many of them were?
We were a total of 5. I'm the youngest in the family, and my sister Nan was the oldest. Then was my brother.
And where did she go to school?
She went to sergeant school, which is sort of a phys ed school. That's best I can
And
describe
so
it.
she wasn't destined. Yale wasn't taking women, but
No,
also
no,
she
no,
was. It
no.
was in a traditional family where in those days, I don't like to say in those days because it was really yesterday, but anyway, she wasn't groomed to go into the family business or to go into business.
No.
But you guys were.
Well, I was presumably groomed for that, but I was a protester. I was a rebel, because at a very early age, I told my mother and father one time at Christmas time, "What would you like for Christmas?" I said, "I'd like a subscription to the Daily Weather Map in New York City, which costs $6." They said, "Well, we'll do that. What else do you want?" I said, "That'll do." And they were quite surprised that I had this peculiar interest. I don't think they were very pleased with it.
When did that start? Or do you? I mean, how
I
did
think
that
I was
start?
7 or 8 years. I don't know, just something I can't pinpoint it
Yeah.
exactly, but
And it was the weather.
it was the weather. I was fascinated by the weather.
So the Second World War came along, and that gave you the opportunity to really go into the weather.
Yes, what happened was I graduated from Yale, and at a very funny experience, I majored in government, primarily because my family had made me think that my interest in weather was something to be ashamed of. And I went to see my senior thesis advisor, Cecil Driver, and he said, "What are you going to write your thesis about?" I said, "I haven't got a clue." He said, "What interests you?" The way he asked the question, I said, "Shall I tell him my secret?" And I said, "I've always been interested in weather." He said, "Why don't you write your thesis about the United States Weather Bureau as a government agency?" It was a terrific thing to do. Changed my whole attitude. Subsequent to that, I applied for a course at graduate school at MIT. Of course, I did not have enough background to get in there. Then my brother told me about a course at NYU, at College of Engineering. And I went up to see the head guy up there. His name had a wonderful name, Athelstan F. Spilhouse.
Oh boy!
He was a South African. We had a nice chat. And he said, "Do you want to take this course?" I said, "Damn right I do." He said, "Okay, you got it." And there were 80 students in that class, and I ended up in the top 10. Just shows you what you can do when you get real interest.
So you were always smart. I mean, in school you performed well. You did
I guess
good
I did.
work.
And I don't think I was any star.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I did pretty well. I think I do remember. I think when I took my college boards, I got, I think, the highest mark in the country
that was-
in physics.
Well, that's pretty good. So what did your family say about all this? Were they waiting for you to come into the family business?
My father was.
Yeah.
I don't think my mother had the same attitude at all. No, I mean, I was definitely. So anyway, I went on and spent 4 years or 3 years in the U.S. Navy, and started out by being ordered to active duty at Lakehurst, New Jersey, in a branch of the service which we used to call lighter than air, thicker than shit.
Oh,
it was
boy.
it was the blimps. They were very peculiar,
Right.
and I had a very peculiar experience at Lakehurst. In those days, they had the blimp squadron as a visiting squadron, so to speak, and the station command. I was attached to the station, but I was working really for the squadron commander. And the guy that I reported to, who was my boss, didn't know as much as I did, which is very embarrassing. So one day, the squadron commander came to me and said, I'm opening up a station at South Weymouth, Mass. Would you like to go up and take a look? I said, when do we leave? So up I went, ended up, I became the #1 guy in a naval air station, South Weymouth, where they had one blimp on a mooring mast. The first thing I knew, there was banging and noise, and they said, what's going on? Went up topside, and there, the field was black, and the anemometer pole was over at a 45-degree angle, and when the black disappeared, no blimp. We just torn off the mooring mast, and I said, this is tough duty
How
up
much
here.
do they cost?
I don't remember what the cost was there. But anyway, a week later, the same condition appeared on the weather map, and I said, I'm not going to get bitten by the same dog twice. So I put, by this time, a second blimp had been sent up from Lakehurst. And I put a general alarm, all hands on the field, and we saved the blimp. Commandant of the 1st Naval District checked around his constituents. Squantum, 50 planes flipped over into Squantum Bay. South Weymouth, no problem. How come? Our aerologists, that's what the Navy called, predicted this. From that point on, I became the
big expert.
I became the private forecaster for the Commandant of the 1st Naval District. Had nothing to do with it, just pure luck.
Well, it was luck, but it was perseverance. It was some kind of smartness and intelligence,
well, I guess.
And diligence. I would think that that's what's typical of the rest of your career, because that you went from there after you got out of the Navy and tried and set up a business predicting weather.
I did.
And you then, developed your marketing plan and everything else and went out and sold the service to some people and worked, you even did it for an airline?
Our main customer, we did have Northeast Airlines,
right.
But we also was selling a snow and ice warning service for 40 cities and towns in the state of Massachusetts. Yeah. And then they went to the Weather Bureau and asked the Weather Bureau whether the Weather Bureau could do that. The Weather Bureau said, sure.
So they preempted.
I thought that was unfair competition. So I went down to Washington and appeared before the Senate subcommittee on the Weather Bureau's appropriation with Senator Joe Ball, the famous Truman's do-nothing Congress. And it was pretty tough. I was 28 years old, got up in this august chamber in the Senate, and I had done my homework. And Joe Ball knew who I was. But we had decided at that time that if we put in a pitch to get New York City. Right. If we didn't get New York City, I was going to quit. We didn't get it, so I quit.
But it gave us an indication, at least in your book. And your book, it's interesting. I mean, this is really a memoir that's filled with a warmth and interesting stories. It gave an indication that you always had an entrepreneurial interest and skill, and that you liked a product, it seemed to me.
I guess I did, because selling a weather service where you have no samples is quite an interesting task, and with no history, really. And
it's a whole new concept to people.
It was a whole new concept, no question about it. And as a matter of fact, my testimony before Senator Joe Ball, it's funny, it looks as if we're going in that direction now. I suggested, at that time, there was Dumont, NBC, and CBS. I said each one should have its own staff of
weather forecasters, on
meteorologists, and that would mean that there'd be a reserve for the military when that came. And then somebody said, wouldn't that be confusing if they have, I said, why would it be getting more confusing than an economic forecast, which is all over the lot?
So now we see all these forecasters that become public figures and heroes, and stars.
They become actors. They're not public figures. That's all they are.
But in the book, you cite a case history, really, of what you say is the first leverage buyout. And before we get to a description of that, and we don't have to describe it, because you then go on and describe this, what it is that you bought a company with a little bit of money and a lot of other people's money. Is that what a leverage buyout is?
It's primarily, the leverage comes from what's called debt. You borrow the money from a bank or an insurance company. That's usually the way it's done.
I have a good political instinct, and I've always believed that it's just something I was born with. I'm a good politician. I am terrible when it comes to money and financial things. Terrible. And in a way, it's a great challenge to me, because I think it disproves what I'm always trying to prove, is that you can't everybody can't do everything. I don't think I could ever go into financing of things.
I think you could.
You think so?
Yes, I do.
So the leverage buyout was an ingenious way for you to start?
Yes, it was. It never been done. It'd been done in real estate for years. That's the whole function.
The concept of a mortgage.
That's right, exactly.
Right.
But the concept of borrowing money against a stream of earnings was not known at that time. Matter of fact, the term leveraged buyout was not even known. They used to when I did my deal, it was called a bootstrap. Came from the old expression, pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Right.
And as you remember, we put up $1,000 and bought a company for $62 million for. Well, that's the thing I love to tell them. After that happened, my wife said to me, "What are you going to do for an encore?" I thought that was a pretty peculiar remark to me. So I went right back to, I'd gotten the idea of these names from a list. I was running a small fund at that time. And I went back and at the A's, I came across a company called Allied Graphic Arts. And it was run by a guy named Sally Weicker. His wife's name was Billy, to confuse. So I went to see him and told him that we owned 10,000 shares of his stock. And I said, "Sally, how do you like being a public company?" He said, "The dumbest mistake I ever made in my life." I said, "Why is that?" "I didn't get enough money out for myself and my family. I got these public shareholders, and they're a pain in the ass." I said, "I tell you what, Bates did your first underwriting. I will do for you what Bates never did. I'll buy the whole company if you and your family take 6 and 2, 6 in cash and 2 in earn-out notes for a price of $8 a share." He jumped out of the chair, shook my hands, and that was a second deal, which was it was amazing.
Was it a good deal for him?
It was a very good deal for him,
and a good deal for you.
A good deal. Most deals like that have to be good both ways.
Right. And then after that, you went into...
Well, after that, with the limited, we built up Allied Graphic Arts, and we were able to borrow $3 million on the equity of that. And that combined with $10 million we borrowed from Mass Mutual, we bought another company called Keith Clark. That one we kept. And that company, ultimately, we changed the name to At a Glance. And
which you all see all the time, right?
Day at a glance, week at a glance, month
calendars.
At a glance. And we bought that company for $13 million, all borrowed money in that case. Every bit of it was borrowed. And in November 1, 1999, we were able to sell that company to Mead Paper, which is now Mead Westvaco, for $550 million. So I think that wasn't a bad day's work.
Right, but you liked running that company, didn't you?
I certainly did.
You liked the product, and you were interested in the company. It was more than just buying and selling or taking over.
When the first deal, which I have to go back a little bit, when we did the Orkin deal, which was the first one.
That was an exterminating company.
Exterminating company. And I wanted to keep that company and run that company, but it ended up that the only way we could get the last $10 million of financing came from Ron's Broadcasting. So they ended up, they still own Orkin Exterminator, the pest control company. But I made a lot of money that way, but I didn't have a business.
You're a critic, I think, these days of many of these leveraged buyouts,
I think,
in that it became too much of a bottom of just making the money out of the flip or the sale or whatever you call it, right?
Well, yes, I think what happened is, first of all, the field got crowded, the prices got too high, and there really was no opportunity to make money. And also, the theory of the typical leverage buyout today, whether it's KKR or any of them, the first thing they talk about is the exit strategy. And I always was quite amused at that, because we were not interested in exit. We were interested in building a business.
And exit means what? Putting the business out of...
No, getting your money out.
Out. That's like buying an apartment or a house and flipping it.
Well, that's
the same kind of thing.
Similar, yeah, similar.
All right.
So they were always good, and that's been the idea now. It stays on that way.
And does it have an oppressive influence on the workers in a company?
It could. Yeah. It could. Changing managements and changing ownership.
So the money that you made from selling At a Glance is the second part of your story.
That's true.
As to what do you do with all this money?
Well, I made up my mind that I was going to give it away. I think I learned that from my mother, and she always used to say to me, she'd rather give money away while she's alive and get some joy out of it. She didn't care what they said about it when you're dead. I feel the same way, and I've really enjoyed. I've taken the business practices that I did in my business and applied them to the charities that I work with.
And that's very important to you.
Very important to me. It's another feeling of. I mean, I don't enjoy just writing a check. I like to get involved. I like to get into things where I care what I'm doing. I don't mind raising money. I always say raising money is no different than selling a product you believe in. If you believe in the charity,
well, it's the same as raising money to buy something else,
well,
right?
It's just
It is.
pretty
It's
much,
like,
yeah,
it's all
same
your
thing,
training,
yeah,
and it's
exactly.
very one. It's so you've used a lot of the techniques. So you take
Yeah.
your money and get other people to join you.
Well, oftentimes I put a challenge gift,
Right.
which is a very good way of raising money. Even went so far to have what I call a drop dead challenge gift.
Ooh,
That's
what was that?
That
Certain
is,
time limit?
Well, no, you put a certain number of specific conditions that have to be met. For instance, that in order to have the challenge met, all the top people would have to join in and participate, and even maybe some of the top management people would have to do if they had to do that plus match the money. If they flunked any little piece of it, anyway, they got nothing. That's why it's called drop dead.
So you sit on a lot of boards.
I do.
Both not-for-profit and I think some profit boards.
The only profit board I sit on now is General American Investors, which is a closed-end investment company.
Right.
And I've been on that for 60 years.
But you meet a lot of people who are wealthy people.
Yes, I do.
And do you find that most of them are of the same spirit and interest that you are?
All over the lot.
Yeah.
Some of them are, and some of them aren't. I mean, I know some of my very good friends. Aggie Gunn, for instance, I'm very close to, feels exactly the way I do.
Was the president of the Museum of Modern Art.
Yes, she was, yes.
Chair of the board, I think.
Absolutely,
yeah.
yes.
And wonderful. But what can we do in the world to make people who have the wealth want to share it with other people?
That's a very, very good question. I wish I knew the answer to that.
Yeah.
And the only thing I've been trying first, I feel that the biggest abuse in this country is the private foundations. And I wrote a paper about that in the New York Review of Books, pointing out that I think having a private foundation last in perpetuity is not productive at all. And I suggested maybe a 50-year life would be worthwhile.
You also go after large foundations in the book that under law they have to spend 5% of their assets a year. Is that and
under the present regulations, the 1969 Act, a private foundation shall spend. And most people confuse that with give.
right? The spending can be for offices, salaries,
That's right.
travel.
Travel. There was a very interesting article in the Boston Globe on April 18th, I believe. These guys took a trip to Africa to examine the poor. They spent $819,000 on the trip.
How did they do that?
Well, they stayed at pretty fancy hotels, and they had private jets, and they lived it up. I mean, it's OPM. It's not their money.
Right.
That's my point. Is once the original donor or the donor's family no longer is around, it becomes a bureaucracy. And the other thing I think that's wrong about private foundations is the original donor gets a tax deduction for a corpus which never goes to charity. Did you understand that, how that works?
No, explain it.
Let's say a man...
Oh, they give, I see.
Let's say they give $100 million.
Right.
Set up a foundation.
They get a tax deduction on the
Yeah,
$100 million.
That's right.
But
Now
the
then,
$100 million
all they give away is the increment, which would be
Right.
the income and the capital gain.
Right.
And then, beyond that, they brag about the fact that they know that the assets have grown. The purpose of the thing is not for the assets to grow, but to give the assets away.
Right.
And it's a totally wrong. And I think that, as a matter of fact, the numbers that I've seen, there's something like $500 billion tied up in private foundations. And I consider that to be just sterile money.
Just think of what that could be doing now.
Absolutely. And just think of what happened right here in New York City recently. During the hard times, just recently, the city cut back, the state cut back, the federal government cut back. The private foundations could have made up the slack. Some of them did, but not all of them. And I think that's wrong. I mean, they're notable. The Star Foundation really came up to bat in that case. Yes, they did. Yeah. And I think Mellon did. A few of them did. But a lot of the others, they would say, well, gee, our assets went down too. Well, but their assets, when they went up, they didn't part with them.
Did you see the story in the paper about the class of '54 at Yale?
Yes, I sure did. I know those guys. Yes. Dick Gilder, I know.
Right. Now, that story made sure to say that the only tax advantage they got was on their initial contribution, not on the value of the fund.
That's right. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. What about inheritance taxes? I know that that Gates Sr. and other people went to Washington to testify, I think this year or late last year, on inheritance tax when the tax bills were being discussed.
Right. Bill Gates Sr. is adamant on that. I mean, I met him. We were both inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences together, and I had lunch and dinner with him. We talked about this at great. I mean, I think one of the things that I think is misunderstood about the inheritance tax, I'm glad you used that term, not death tax, as the Republicans like to call it. Teddy Roosevelt started this thing on the basis that he did not want to see a landed gentry in the United States. It was done really primarily for that purpose. It has become a pretty important revenue source, but that was not the original. And also, now that you've got the charities all geared to tax deductions, and if you took away the estate tax, which is another term for it, which is just as good as inheritance, but if you leave out the death tax, you might take away a large motivation for people.
Let's talk about some of the work that you do and your funding. I mean, is chess in the schools one of your favorite projects?
Chess in the schools.
Is that your baby?
That's my baby, and I'll tell you why. It's because I had to go back when I was running a small fund, which I did before I did my first buyout, which is called incubation, where we were buying what we called unrecognized securities. When I sold my business and started in charity, I sort of took the same idea to say, well, maybe I can find an unrecognized charity and nurture it, and that's that.
And they were lucky.
They were very lucky because I mean we've taken that thing from practically nothing. It's now, I don't know where you know the numbers. My gosh, we have 38,000 kids in 160 schools in New York City, and these are all kids from what they call Title I schools, economically disadvantaged kids.
They give hot lunches in that program.
That's right, exactly.
I have two grandchildren who are not in public school, but they played in the larger chess tournaments.
Yes.
And it was one of the most exciting things I ever saw. You go into the school cafeteria. This is just one site. Yeah. I think your group runs about 5 of these citywide tournaments.
We have one every Saturday during the school year.
It's amazing.
And it's open to anybody. It's not only open to our kids. And we have big tournaments. I mean,
so great.
And what's amazing about that, our kids go and they compete in the nationals against fields of private schools from all over the country, and these kids win.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And we had a little girl this last year, 6th grader. She was number 3 in the U.S., and she was invited to go to Greece to compete in the World Youth Games. Spent 2 weeks in Greece. We organized a trip to Athens for her. So she a little girl from the South Bronx.
That's great.
And we have some of our kids now who've just gotten of college age. They're all getting into college.
School. We have 2 minutes left in this whole thing, if you can believe that. The public library, that's a very important organization for you.
It is.
And the wonderful Lincoln Center Performing Arts Library.
Yeah.
I sat next to you at a luncheon there once when I was in the city council, because you guys really, did you pay for the whole building?
Where?
At Lincoln Center?
Lincoln Center, the whole building.
The Performing Arts, the library.
LPA, yes.
Okay. And then the Museum of Natural History.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they have the Cullman Hall of the Universe.
Right. And what else?
Well,
research, bio.
Well, we set up a joint project with the American Museum of Natural History and the New York Botanical Garden in what's called molecular systematics, which is really DNA applied to the classification of plants and animals.
I have a friend up there, Douglas Daly. Do you know him?
I don't know him.
Yeah.
No.
All right.
And no, I mean I get a great kick out of giving money away and being involved in the act.
How you do it.
Yes.
In the direction.
The direction.
And in bringing the talents together.
And I brought MoMA when they closed the museum.
That's right.
I came up with the idea that sending the sculpture up to the Botanical Garden took me 4 years to get them to agree to that. I never give up. I like doing that.
So you not only made a lot of money out of mergers, you continued to merge now. I mean, you're talking about joint ventures, right?
Yeah.
So we could, in fact, take that vocabulary from your background in finance and in investing and everything and bring it into the sphere very easily. It is transferable.
There's no reason why not-for-profits, they should be run the way a for-profit company is run. The people who think it's different.
Right.
It really is.
So what are you going to do next in 10 seconds?
In 10 seconds? I don't know what I can do in 10 seconds.
I don't mean in 10 seconds. I mean for you to tell me in 10 seconds.
Well, I think I've got so many commitments now that I don't think I'm open to any new ideas. And I've probably got another 20 years to work this out for myself.
Well, thank you very much, Lewis Cullman, and please say hello to Dorothy.
I will.
And we look forward to your continuing contribution to our
and keep plugging
world
the book.
in our city.
Keep plugging the book.
Do read this book, Can't Take It With You, The Art of Making and Giving Money.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.